Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today, those of you here and online on our Zoom. Team, you have heard me say, in all the ways I know how, thank you. Muchas gracias. But today, I brought a couple friends to emphasize the message of thanks. Secretary Blinken, Assistant Secretaries Nichols and Barkley, Ambassador Sullivan on Zoom, let me introduce you to the team who planned and operationalized the arrival of 222 political prisoners from Nicaragua to their flight to freedom to the United States. Together, they exemplify what it means to be public servants. More than 300 State Department staff, a true cross-section of the department, came together to support this project. We had linguists, tech and data gurus, we had diplomatic security officers, facility managers, human rights officers, reporting officers, and more. These exceptional women and men came together as a unified team, frequently not knowing each other's name, save the name tags we had, and they planned for the movement, and then the arrival, and then the well-being of the political prisoners during their first hours and days on U.S. soil. It truly did take a village, and there are some who assisted greatly that are not here with us today, both from the State Department, but also DHS and HHS, Virginia state authorities, and also a huge swath of NGO community members from around the country. Secretary Blinken, team, to kick things off today, I am pleased to have Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, Brian Nichols, followed directly by Acting Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Aaron Barkley, say some introductory words. Assistant Secretary, the floor is yours.
Secretary Blinken, Teresa, Aaron, team, good morning. It's been an incredible journey. The Ortega Murillo regime's brutal crackdown began in 2018, and the department and our interagency colleagues have used diplomatic, economic, and programmatic tools to push for the return of democracy in Nicaragua. These efforts made a difference. In a single week of quiet behind-the-scenes diplomacy, we worked with the Nicaraguan government to secure the release of 222 political prisoners. They are young people, students who peacefully protested to fight for a better future for their country, and an older generation, some of whom fought alongside Ortega decades ago, who the regime now considers threats to its control. They are clergy serving and protecting their congregants. They are community members who mobilize organically, campesinos, journalists, and political leaders who threaten the regime's grip on power. And one, a wrongfully detained U.S. citizen, has now reunited with his loved ones. As the plane took off, and the only home that many of the 222 had ever known slipped away below, the weight of the mission sunk in for both passengers and crew. There were few dry eyes amid the singing of the Nicaraguan national anthem and shouts of Viva Nicaragua Libre and Viva America. While we know that this operation offered hope to those still in Nicaragua, we are under no illusions about the difficult road that lies ahead. We remain steadfast in calling for the regime to restore civil liberties and democracy for all Nicaraguan people. Thank you all for being a part of this historic moment in U.S. diplomacy. Each one of you played a crucial role in that effort, and I particularly want to thank you, Teresa, for your incredible leadership in this effort. Your knowledge and your ability to bring together this group of incredible people really at the drop of a hat is one of the most incredible achievements I have ever witnessed. So I'm deeply grateful to you. I'm deeply grateful to every single person who participated because you all made this happen. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Secretary Blinken, colleagues. Brian, Tressa, thank you so much for being here today. It really was a historic moment, what we are all here to acknowledge and celebrate. And I just want to join in saying thank you to everybody for everything that you did. I want to talk about you. Over the course of this operation and since, I heard from many of you. Some of you worked at the State Department for 5 years. Some of you have worked here for 20 years. But I heard from many of you during the time of this operation and since that this was the most meaningful work you have ever done in your careers. And I just want to pause there for a minute, because I think particularly for civil servants, we spend most of our careers here in Washington, D.C. It can often feel very far away from the people and the issues that we work on every day. But this was one of those very rare opportunities where you get the right people in the right place at the right time with the right resources to change lives. And that's what you all did over the course of 5 days and now into the many months and years ahead. I have to shout out my bureau, of course. I'm always proud of DRL, but I was particularly proud of you all with one email asking for volunteers. Dozens of you answered that call. This was really remarkable. This was, of course, at a time where we were racing to get the human rights report done, and we were doing Ukraine and all of the other big priorities. You all were able to put that aside. Colleagues backed you up, families supported you, and you answered the call to help set these 222 people up. And so thank you for that. We, of course, could not have done this, as Tressa said, without our NGO partners and the diaspora here in the area. In particular, the Race and Equality Institute was the NGO partner that we were fortunate to have in place. And literally, as Brian said, within a few hours, they had secured hotel rooms, space for a reception center, prepaid cell phones, shuttle transportation, clothing, hygiene products, and so much more that we needed to make sure that these 222 guests that we were welcoming to the United States were welcomed in a humane and dignified way. And you all did that. We also, as you know, brought in psychosocial support and experts from Colombia and from the Center for Victims of Torture. These folks will continue to work with the 222 political prisoners over the course of the next many months to provide them with the type of support services that we all know they will need after the excruciating torture and treatment that they had in prison. Now, I have to say, while we were working away, figuring out the mechanics of this exercise, along came Tressa. And the truth is, Tressa blew the roof off the operation. There is no doubt about that. Yes, I agree. And really, Tressa, we exceeded expectations on this because of you, and we are deeply grateful to you. Now, I have told Tressa many times that she has to write down how she does these operations, because we need to teach each other and colleagues who come after us how we do this. It is not a easy thing. In fact, as Brian said, it was miraculous what you did, Tressa. And so we're not letting you go on to your next big adventure until you put down on paper exactly how we all who are going to be here are going to have to do this in the future. So please. So finally, let me just reiterate what Brian said. It was incredible, but the work is not done. We know that we have worked to support these 222 people who are now on American soil, as well as their families who are still in Nicaragua. And we have work to do on the regime, and the regime's just abhorrent treatment of its own people and their desire for freedom and democracy in Nicaragua. So here's to sustaining those efforts in the future. And thank you all so much again for everything you've done. We are deeply grateful.
Thank you both for those very lovely and kind remarks. We now turn our attention to our talented and dedicated team at U.S. Embassy Managua. They have joined us via Zoom. Ambassador Kevin Sullivan has pre-recorded his remarks. Let's take a listen.
Mr. Secretary, Ambassador Nichols, Tressa, and everyone, greetings from Nicaragua, and thank you for this special event today. We at Embassy Managua are proud to have played a part in the U.S. flight that took 222 people from wrongful detention in Nicaragua to freedom in the United States. In addition to giving these individuals their lives and liberty back, the outstanding work of our teams in Managua and in Washington gave a whole country its voice back. Millions of Nicaraguans now feel a new hope that their freedom will one day be restored as well. This group was a remarkable cross-section of Nicaraguan society. They were students, rural activists, prominent business leaders, regime dissidents, priests, well-known journalists, and 7 presidential candidates. All had been detained on false charges for over a year, some for more than 4. They had been denied access to their families and lawyers, as well as to adequate food and medical care. Our outstanding team on the tarmac saw firsthand the anxiety and confusion that these men and women experienced when they first arrived at the airport February 9th. Many have since described the deep relief and gratitude they felt once they were in our care, and once they knew that we would work diligently to reunite them with their families. Mr. Secretary, we in Managua want to thank you and the rest of the department leadership for your guidance and strong support for this historic operation. I believe this represented our organization at its best: bold, principled, nimble, and compassionate. DC colleagues, thank you for your outstanding efforts in welcoming the 222. We're so proud to serve with you. Hasta pronto.
So much, Ambassador Sullivan. It's great to have Ambassador Sullivan and Team Managua with us in the House. Secretary Blinken, in addition to the remarks you just heard from your senior leadership, I wanted you to hear directly from your staff. They are all leaders in their own right, and they made miracles happen hourly. You are going to hear 6 short vignettes from staff members taking you chronologically through the planning to the February 9th arrival to the early days at the Westin Dulles Welcome Center. These stories are really a way to share the intense experience with you and with each other to make practical the theoretical. And a warning label, if I may. There may be a few tears, there may be a bit of laughter. It was an emotional roller coaster, to say the least. I'll introduce the speakers 2 by 2. First up, Catherine Cantrell. By day, she's a Nicaraguan desk officer. She was a key member of the planning team for this project. And our second speaker will be Marta Youth. She's PDES at PRM by day and was former DCM Managua. She was drafted to join the plane team, meeting the political prisoners on the tarmac and flying to freedom with them. Catherine, the floor is yours, directly followed by Marta.
I will never forget the moment that Das Mandrala stuck her head into my office and whispered, "The Nicaraguan government just offered to release political prisoners to the United States." What? How many? Just our U.S. citizen? No, she said, all of them. And just like that, we formed a close-knit planning team that worked behind the scenes to mount this operation. Lives were at stake, and we feared that any leak or change of plans could have derailed the entire thing. We worked with amazing speed with other offices and agencies to identify funding for a plane, for lodging, for emergency assistance. We set a date for the flight with the Nicaraguan government. We secured a plane, a crew, and landing permission in Managua. But ultimately, skilled diplomacy at the highest levels, both within our own interagency and with the Nicaraguan government, kept this operation on track up to its final hours. A call from Ambassador Sullivan to the Nicaraguan foreign minister conveyed our final offer. An eternal wait for the return call by the foreign minister, and a loud whoop from Ambassador Sullivan when he hung up the phone. The flight could take off from Managua.
Having been DCM in Managua until mid-2017, WHA asked me to join the team on the plane because I would be a comforting, familiar face. I knew many of the political prisoners. They were my old contacts. We arrived in the dark, in the wee hours of the morning, and we were directed to an isolated corner of the Managua airport. The prisoners finally started arriving in a series of buses, windows papered over, led by pickup trucks filled with armed police. Some prisoners told us that they feared they were being taken to a judge for more sentencing, or to be tortured, or to be executed. They came off the buses dazed and shocked, but on some of them I could see the recognition click in. There was a lot of hugging and reassuring people that this was the USG to the rescue. The one American citizen who I'd not seen for many years stepped off his bus, looked me in the eye, and said, "I love you, Marta," and he gave me a big hug. On the tarmac, the political prisoners were happy, relieved, sad, confused, and angry all at the same time. It was heart-wrenching. People were anguished about leaving their family members behind. Several prisoners kissed the tarmac before they left. Several others had a few choice words to shout at the authorities, and we had to hustle them onto the plane before they had to put a stop to our mission. Inside the plane, it was one giant reunion. Fathers and mothers reunited with their children, husbands and wives, schoolmates, cousins, friends. I met 3 brothers who hadn't seen each other for years because they'd been imprisoned separately, and they found each other on the plane. When we took off, as the Assistant Secretary said, they sang the Nicaraguan national anthem. And as we flew, people would become overcome with emotion, and suddenly there would be a shout, and somebody would say, "Viva Managua," or "Viva Messiah," and everybody on the plane would go wild for a second. I was asked to say a few words when we took off, and one of the things I said was that we were accompanied by more than 200 heroes who had fought and sacrificed for human rights, for their families, for their community, and for their country. And as for the team on the plane, it was our greatest honor to accompany them, and I meant it.
Thank you, Marta. Next up is Joshua Temblador, Deputy Director at WHA's Policy Shop. By day, he served alongside our talented Ops Crisis Management team as head of our Maine State Task Force. And on deck, Hannah Odio, a DRL Program Analyst. She also packed a suitcase and joined the plane team, and then helped the newly arrived Nicaraguans from the airport to their first few days at the Dulles Westin Hotel. Josh, the floor is yours, followed by Hannah.
As the team lead for the coordination group in the Ops Center, I vividly remember the moment before the floodgates opened and the calls came in. It was about 1 a.m. Many of us have been there since that time, and we're starting to get anxious. We hadn't received a single call, external call, since then, and we started worrying about tech problems. And all of a sudden, I think the whole country got our number all at once, and we just started getting a flood of calls. And it was a whirlwind of activity, of phone calls, of loud conversations in Spanish. It was amazing. But there are quieter moments, too. We offered in our script an opportunity for all the family members to pass a message to their loved ones. Some people just said, "Call us back." Other people said, "Tell our family member we love them." Others asked to give a big abrazo, a big hug, to welcome to the United States. One of my teammates kind of recounted his last call, and that was with connecting a former political prisoner who was tortured to his family. And he had just gone through the worst experience of his life, and he told them, "Siempre me han dicho que Dios reside en los Estados Unidos, y ahora lo creo." He said, people always told me that God resides in the United States, and now I believe them.
After landing at Dulles Airport and accompanying individuals through Customs and Immigration and the CBP medical unit, I handed out packed lunches and boarded a bus with the first individuals cleared to proceed to the hotel and welcome center for intake and rest. Although this wasn't just any airport shuttle, to our great surprise, this was a party bus, complete with lava lights, changing colors, large speakers, and an empty bucket that we at first thought was the trash can, but soon realized was for champagne. Now, I'd like to reiterate how short the timeline was to pull together this whole mission, with just a few days to acquire all the necessary logistical needs, which required a lot of resourceful thinking. As we boarded the bus and people started to pull out their lunch items, one individual spoke up and said, "When I was woken up and asked to take a shower and clean out my cell last night, I thought I was going to be executed. I would have never thought I'd be taken to an airplane to come to the U.S. However, sitting in a party bus on U.S. soil with a sandwich in my hand is just inconceivable. I'll never forget this moment.
Thank you. Our final two staff member speakers, Gail Morgado. She's an office director in the CSO Bureau and joined us at the Welcome Center using her brilliant Spanish language skills as part of our intake and translation team, among many duties as assigned. And on deck, Michael Kemp. He's a senior real estate officer at our Bureau of Overseas Building Operations. He brought his 2021 Dulles Afghan Expo experience with me to bear, working with the hotel team and our staff to smooth out ad hoc processes which changed by the minute. Gail, the floor is yours, followed by Mike.
As an interpreter during intake and processing, I had the opportunity to speak to a Nicaraguan priest who had just left his parish of over 30 years. In going through my checklist, I asked if he had any urgent medical needs. Initially, he said he did not, but then said he had been without 4 essential medicines for over 24 hours. I then went through and said to him, okay, I'm blanking. I said I was going to blank, and I'm blanking. Sorry about that. So I then reached out and pointed to the HHS team across the room. And I said that he should meet with them. But I noticed his overwhelmed expression in response. A few hours later, I found him, and I asked if he had been seen. He had not. So I then went and offered to walk with him and interpret. And the HHS team provided him with excellent individualized care as he entrusted me to interpret his personal medical needs. He then turned to me and said, "You have been an angel sent down to earth. Thank you for your kindness." I then felt only gratitude in that moment. Grateful to be part of a life-saving mission, grateful to show humanity to someone who had perhaps been questioning it in recent days, and just grateful to be able to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Tressa. Before I begin, I just wanted to thank Secretary Blinken and our special guest for joining us today. I wanted to thank Tressa for all of your leadership throughout the whole Operation Nicaragua. And thank you to all the volunteers here today. And I want to emphasize volunteers. You guys didn't have to be here, but you were. So really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you guys. And I don't think we would have been able to accomplish what we did without each and every one of you here and also on the phone. So thank you guys. My short story today is actually not about a parolee, but about the Westin Hotel maintenance man named Miguel. Now, many of you may know Miguel. He's probably about 65 or 70 years old. He was running around in his black polo shirt, constantly sweating, taking out trash cans, setting up tables and chairs, and sweeping up crumbs from the ballroom floor. Despite having such a physically demanding job, Miguel always somehow had a positive attitude and a smile on his face. One evening, I looked over and I saw Miguel standing around a table of about 10 political prisoners, engaged in deep conversation, dustpan and broom in hand. I didn't think much of it at first, but afterwards, when we were taking out the trash together, I mentioned to Miguel, "Hey, what were you guys talking about?" Miguel became very serious and said, "Actually, you know, I was a political refugee, and I came to the United States 14 years ago, so I know exactly what these guys are going through." And so I shared with them some of the hardships I had to overcome, some of the struggles that I've had to overcome, but how that was completely worth it because I was now fortunate to be living here in the United States. So I think the political prisoners, having listened to him, they were super engaged. They were probably thinking to themselves, this guy can do it, we can do it as well. So I think his words were very inspiring, and I think it gave them a sense of hope that they're now home here in the United States as well. So thank you.
And a final vignette from me before I give you the floor, sir. It was February 14th. It was a special day. It was day 6. I was in my last clean suit. It was closing time. The last Nicaraguan to depart, Jose, caught me in the hall. We had spent the last 6 days trying to get to know each other without a language in common. Miss Teresa. He paused me. Hola, ¿cómo estás? I said, completely using all of my non-existent Spanish language skills. He had clearly rehearsed. Happy Saint Valentine's Day. May I hug goodbye? And one hug later, I said farewell. And my amazing colleague, our amazing colleague, Brian, performed one more miracle. He had arranged for Jose's mother, who's in the United States, to fly to Dulles. He took Jose to Dulles, connected him with Mom, and off they flew to Miami. And that was the last of our Nicaraguans to depart the Dulles Welcome Center. And the Westin Hotel reverted to, well, being a regular business hotel. And the 300 State Department staff volunteers, who had actually been humanitarian crisis leaders, reverted back to their day jobs. And the 222 political prisoners from Nicaragua began their next, undoubtedly challenging and difficult chapter, but free, on U.S. soil and beyond. That, Mr. Secretary, is the last story I wish to tell. The floor is yours.
Well, this is really a moment to just drop the mic and leave, because a few things I wanted to share with all of you. But I think the first and most important is this. Moments like this are important. We don't usually take the time, even half an hour, 45 minutes, to just press pause and reflect on something that we've done, because there's just too much to do. And the inboxes are overflowing, and it's always move, move, move. But it is important to do that, because when we're at our best, as each of you has been in this extraordinary chapter, it really is worth reflecting on. And I hope that it inspires, energizes, encourages each of us to keep going, to keep doing this, to keep with this calling that has drawn all of us together in this incredible enterprise. Aaron said something that is, I think, very powerful, and it's that, we get called upon to do lots of things in our careers here at State, other agencies. But there are not that many moments when you can really say and see directly that something you have done has actually changed someone's life and changed it for the better. There are usually too many points of connection along the way to really see it and really feel it. But the experience that each of you has had in this instance, I hope really makes that connection, makes it powerful, and it's something that you'll take with you throughout your careers and throughout your lives, no matter what you do going forward. It's simply the most powerful thing that we occasionally have an opportunity to do, and it really is worth reflecting on. Tressa, my friend, my travel companion, colleague, this is the epitome of the person here who runs into the burning building every single time, no matter how challenging it is, and gets the job done. And we've seen that again and again. I'm so grateful once again to you for your incredible leadership in this instance. The extraordinary team of volunteers, and that was a hugely important word, volunteers that Mike shared with us. That just inspires me tremendously, because again, I've seen it time and again in this department. When we've had an urgency, when we've had an emergency situation, when we've had a daunting challenge, people have been raising their hands. They've been standing up, and they've been running, you've been running into the building. And that makes a huge difference. Your determination, your skill, your heart, which is also very apparent in the stories that we've heard from Catherine, from Marta, from Josh, from Hannah, from Gail, from Michael. That truly is inspiring to me as well. And to everyone who's joining us today, including folks who are online, as well as everyone here in person, thank you for everything that you've done, and thank you for sharing the stories. We know that for each of the 7 stories that we just heard, there are hundreds more from across the U.S. government, from across NGOs, from people who stepped up to welcome the 222. And I hope that in some way as well, we'll find a way to collect some of those stories and maybe share them with colleagues, because again, I think it's going to be incredibly inspiring to them. But these doctors, these political leaders, these journalists, these priests, these others who all came together and found themselves together as a result of your work on that plane, they had one thing that connected them, one overriding aspiration, and that was to simply exercise their fundamental freedoms and to try to safeguard the freedom of their fellow citizens. Tragically, in Ortega's Nicaragua, that's a crime. It's why these activists were imprisoned for months and sometimes years, denied visits from their loved ones. Many were held in harsh conditions, little access to sunlight, to fresh air, writing materials, books. One prisoner recalled reading and rereading the label on a tube of toothpaste. And as you've heard, living with that constant fear that you could be pulled into another cell, to be beaten up, to be tortured, the constant fear that you might even be executed, living with that every single day is its own kind of horrific torture. But it's precisely because of the power of their message, their actions, the alternative vision that they have for their own country, and the way it should treat its own people. It's exactly why the regime stripped them of their citizenship soon after they came to the United States. That too speaks volumes. But it's also why we felt compelled to do what we could to bring them to safety. And it's why the work that all of you did and did together was so important. Now, that work began in large part with our colleagues in Embassy Managua, who negotiated with the Nicaraguan government, creating a system to ensure that each of the 222 prisoners was accounted for, and when the moment finally came, during the early morning hours of February 9th, physically escorting them to the airplane and then to their freedom. Catherine talked about the waiting for that final confirmation, and I know that's excruciating. And as this was all happening, and Brian and Aaron and others were keeping me informed of what was going on, I have to admit, I wasn't so sure this was really going to come together. I had a funny feeling, oh, this is going to fall apart. It seems almost too good to be true. But too good to be true because so much work actually goes into this. These things don't just happen. It takes the incredible effort that started in Managua to actually get it done. From there, more than 350 of our colleagues from the U.S. government, as well as partners from the state of Virginia, NGOs, you all took over. You worked around the clock, you worked through the weekend, reuniting prisoners with their loved ones. You interpreted for them. You provided them with food, with clothing, with health care. You helped them through the jarring process of starting a new life, far from their homes and their communities. And what I heard also in the stories that were told is I think you all responded in a powerfully human way, because I imagine as you're there with someone who has just had this absolute sea change in their life, you're thinking and feeling and understanding how totally jarring and disorienting that is, even in this incredibly positive way. And the humanity that you showed as fellow human beings in helping them navigate this particular passage, that in and of itself was hugely important. And indeed, it wasn't just what you did, it's how you did it, with care, with compassion, by asking each of our Nicaraguan friends, how are you doing? Are you okay? What do you need? Probably a question they hadn't been asked in a long, long time. By arriving at the tarmac with American colleagues that they knew from the past, they were welcomed by familiar faces. And Marta, I know that must have had a powerful impact on them as well. As one of the volunteers put it, the whole operation was successful because we all cared too much to accept anything less. Now, because of this work, our Nicaraguan friends are beginning new lives across more than 24 U.S. states, some now moving on to other countries as well. Some have already jumped back into activism, no surprise, rallying international support and pressure for a better future for their country. The United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Summit for Democracy just this week. At the summit, we heard some of these voices. Others are starting the process of opening new businesses, continuing their studies, getting on with their lives that were so violently interrupted by the Nicaraguan regime. Now, in the months ahead, we have our NGO partners that will continue to support the recent arrivals' relocation. We have our embassy colleagues who will work to reunify family members in Nicaragua with their newly settled family members in the United States. So this process goes forward, it carries on. And at the same time, for us as a government, we'll join partners across the hemisphere and around the world to continue to push for a return to democracy and respect for human rights in Nicaragua, while also using all of the diplomatic and economic tools that we have to try to promote accountability for the widespread abuses from the regime. So, in a very small period of time, in a very intense way, you gave us a reminder of who we are when we're at our best, which is not every day, but it was in the days that you were engaged in this mission. A country that stands with those on the side of freedom and human rights and fights for our democratic values around the world. You've demonstrated that with your service, you've demonstrated that with your dedication. So I'm so glad we just had a few moments together, again, to press the pause button, to reflect a little bit on what each of you has done, and to take that with you going forward, because this career that all of you have been called to in a variety of ways, I know a lot of days can be frustrating. I know we pile on the work, the inbox gets higher, the resources seem to shrink, and we're working on all of that. And I know there are days for each of us when we say, is it worth it? Maybe I should be doing something else. I hope and I believe strongly that this experience is a reminder of what an incredible pursuit this is, what an incredible responsibility we all have, but also what an incredible privilege it is to actually work for, represent your country, and try to make sure that the country that we love and share and the department that we love and share is actually operating at its best. In this instance, it was because you were. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the President and as a fellow American. Thanks for exemplary work. Thanks for your service to our country. Thank you, everyone.
Folks, we're going to take a photo with the Secretary. If everyone can stand up, move towards the middle, we'll come down in front.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right.
Freddie's got